A Mighty Blaze presents Friday Frontliner.
Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. Isn't our new music fabulous? It's from our producer, Ollie Martin, and we're all really, really excited about it. So I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, which was the initiative that I started along with Jenna Blum to help authors and indie bookstores during the pandemic and to help readers too, just to get the word out. And today we have this, one of my literary heroines is here, Dana Spiotta. And the book is Wayward, and I just loved this book so much. I literally, I read it thinking this is exactly the right book for the right time. And also, as I actually reread it because I loved it so much, and I wanted to make sure that I had important and smart sounding questions for you. So thank you, Dana, for being here. We're so excited to have you and to host you.
Thank you, Caroline, for having me.
You're welcome. So first I'm going to introduce Dana, and then we're going to have a conversation. So Dana is an American author, obviously. Her first novel, Stone Arabia, which is wonderful, was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. Next came Eat the Document, which was, again, a National Book Awards finalist, and it won the Rosenthal Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Lightning Field, her next novel, was a New York Times notable book. She's a recipient of the Rome Prize in Literature, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a New York Foundation of the Arts Fellow. She lives in Syracuse, where she also teaches. So I want to read all of you some of these blurbs from this book. It's the best book of the summer: USA Today, Town and Country, the Philadelphia Inquirer, BuzzFeed, Real Simple, The Millions More. The New York Times has called it a virtuosic, singular, and very funny portrait of a woman seeking sanity and purpose in a world gone mad. The New Yorker calls it a comic, vital new novel. The New York Times has also called it a furious and addictive new novel about mothers and daughters and one woman's midlife reckoning as she flees her suburban life. And I sort of want to echo that. It's incredibly addictive. It's an incredibly addictive read. And we're going to talk about the structure about this too, because the structure for me was so interesting. So Wayward is about four women. Sam Raymond, who's facing menopause. She's in her 50s in midlife. Allie, her teenage daughter. Lily, Sam's mom, who's dying, and a fictional character of a non-fictional society, the Anita community, she's like a 19th century suffragette who ran away. I was telling Dana before that this book seemed like the right book for exactly now, given the continuing war on women and what's happening in Texas, which brings me to one of my favorite questions, which is an inception story. Were these the issues haunting you that led to this book in particular? And how much did you know before you started the book that Sam would leave her safe suburb? Or was that the only thing that you knew when you started?
This is such a writer question. You can tell that you're
I know.
a writer. It's and a good question. I do kind of start more intuitively, and in this case, I had walked by the house that inspired the house in the book, and it's this beautiful arts and crafts house that's really falling apart. That's about 7 blocks from my house, and I just had this idea one day that a woman would be looking at it and she would sign a contract to buy it for very little money, which you can in Syracuse. And only when she was driving home to her house in the suburbs did she realize she was going to leave her husband. And I thought, well, that's the starting point. And then as I was beginning the book, the election happened, the 2016 election. And it kind of, those two things merged together in my writing. And I was kind of writing to figure out, well, why did she do this? And I was going through a lot of the same perimenopausal symptoms that she is going through, the sleeplessness in particular. And when I would not be able to sleep, which was frequently, I would get up and work on the book. And so I wrote it sort of in this state that she's in. And I wrote it to really kind of figure out, what to make of I wrote it to think about this character, to find out about her, but also I like to think about the broader culture located in very specific people. And I think the thing that I realized as I was writing is that her mother was really the main thing that made her kind of have a crisis, the fact that her mother is dying. And just when she needs to be most whole, she is physically out of control. So that really interested me. And I think a lot of women are in that position where your kids are leaving, if you have kids, a lot of people in that position, and you're losing the older generation. And at the same time, some people have these horrible menopausal symptoms, or not horrible, but intense menopausal symptoms that make you really aware of time passing and aging in a way that's very visceral.
So you didn't outline this novel; it just sort of organically progressed.
Well, I always try to outline as I go. I take a lot of notes and I think about where it might go, but I know that it changes as I'm writing.
Yeah.
So for this, I try not to get too ahead of myself. But there's a part I would say after about a year, about a third of the way in, I start to see where I think it's going, and then I start to really kind of map it out more.
Yeah, I was saving these questions for later, but because of your answer, I have to know now. I love the structure where we hear from, it's so interesting to me that we hear from Sam a whole lot, and then we hear from Allie a whole lot. And sometimes we hear from them about the same event, which I always want to talk about later. And the thing that I loved is I love that Sam is sort of coming undone. Allie is sort of coming undone too, because she has this relationship with a much older man. And Lily, the mother who is dying, we never hear from her point of view, which I thought, why? I mean, I've been thinking and thinking about that, like why you made that decision. And Lily's the one who's the calmest of all. She's sort of like the mother you wish you always had. And then to make things more exciting, at the very end, we hear from Clara Loomis from the Anita community and her own voice. So that just, I wrote myself down notes about that because I thought that was so original and so brilliant. So first I want to know, did you always know that Lily would not speak and have her own voice? And what made you decide? I think it's absolutely the right decision, but I wanted to know what made you decide to put Clara's voice in there and at the end?
These are such great questions. I originally thought it would be all Sam. And then as I was writing, I realized I really needed to hear from the daughter. And I thought, okay, I'll write the same scene that I just described from the daughter's point of view to see just to kind of get deeper into the scene. I don't know if you ever do that, where you just kind of switch positions, maybe it's not going to even be in the book. And her voice was so alive to me. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, so she's got a secret. She's got a whole bunch of stuff she's working out. And so then I thought, okay, we're going to hear from the daughter too, because she really kind of took over part of the book. And then I did imagine, okay, so we'll probably hear from the mother, Lily. But Lily is really kind of, she's kind of accepted the world without her, that the world is going to go on without her. And these are things that Allie and Sam have not figured out. And it didn't, I just wanted to hear from her as she's interacting with these two women, with the granddaughter and with her daughter. And then I did have this idea that I thought, well, we hear so much that a lot of the book is satire, and especially in the first half. And Clara Loomis gets made fun of quite a bit by Sam, and she works in this historical house that used to belong to Clara Loomis, and she's a very compromised figure. She's a reproductive rights activist, which is very of the moment right now. But she was also, as some reproductive rights activists were, kind of tending into this weird eugenics thing too. Right. And so she's kind of, she's a problematic figure. She's a problematic figure for that reason. And I thought, well, would it be great to hear from her when she's Allie's age, when she's young and idealistic, and sort of get a sense of what she was really like from her own voice. And I just thought, I can't do that. I've never done any historical fiction before. I don't know how to do that. But I had this I felt that it would be great to have that. And so then when I was progressing, I realized that there would be the second half of the book would be different. It would have those pamphlets about Syracuse and the weird cabinet of curiosities, and Sam's body at one point starts to narrate the blood. And so it kind of goes a little wayward, like the book itself goes a little wacky. And I wasn't sure readers would just go on board. I was really hoping they would. And so I did a lot of research to get ready for writing Clara's section, and because it has a lot of biblical reference, stuff like that. And so but again, it's one of those things where the voice really just came alive as I was working on it. And I think it gives it a little, I hope it's a surprise, but I hope it deepens the meaning of the book for people.
It did. I mean, what it did for me was, first there was a surprise of it, but then there was also, I really liked her. I liked Claire so much from her voice, where you're right, at the beginning they're saying like, oh, women, can they wear pantaloons and bloomers instead of pants? And it's haha, the olden days. And then when she speaks, she's so full of passion and fire, and she's young. And I loved her, and I thought it was exactly the right thing to do. And I also this also was a later question that I want to ask now, which was also about the pamphlets. There's a whole section on Syracuse written by Sam, and then she has a bunch of curiosities that she dictates. And I wanted to know like where those ideas came from, because again, when I read them, I was surprised, and I thought, this is so perfect. Why didn't I ever think of doing anything like this? So at what point did you think about doing that?
When I went to the community house where the actual commune used to be, they had a cabinet of curiosities there. And I thought, oh, people used to do this. They would just collect little objects. And I thought, this would appeal to Sam. She's going to have her own version of these things. And her pamphlet really goes off the rails into this kind of personal, so it's sort of her becoming undone because she hasn't slept, and she's experienced, the things that we don't want to give too much away, I suppose, but she experiences she lives in this neighborhood that's, a very poor neighborhood and subjugated a lot. And so she experiences the world in a different way than when she was in the suburbs. And she's changed by this, and she's just kind of losing it a little bit. And I was really thinking a lot about her state of mind, and I needed to kind of. It also not convenient, but I mean, it also kind of gave you a break. We see Sam kind of falling apart, and then these things kind of force you to look at some other stuff, and you still don't know what happened to Sam. So I'm hoping it gives some momentum into the end. We're wondering sort of, well, what happened? And so these little interludes, and we go to Allie looking at these things,
That leads me to the question about, so much of this book, to me at least, seems to be about how we perceive others see us, how we see ourselves, how we present ourselves. There's this amazing part of the novel where Sam goes to a comedy club, and she's doing this. It's almost painful to read because there's not that many people, and she's talking. Her whole thing is making it funny that I'm a bad mother, and nobody's really listening. And then she happens to look up, and Allie, her daughter, is there. And the very next chapter, Allie tells us like what really happened then and how her mother dealt it. And to me, it was such a, I don't know, it was like singing off in all different areas, because of course it's the question of like, what do we think is important, and how do we use humor towards it, and what is funny, and whose life belongs to us. It's sort of like the whole Anita community is it's supposed to be a free community of free love, but they're really claiming ownership of people's lives. And I just loved seeing the juxtaposition of Sam and Allie looking at the same incident and having very, very different reactions. Again, was that planned, or did that just sort of come out? Or
I kind of, that I knew, because I had this idea about, she has this friend, right, MH, who's kind of like a little bit of a cult leader herself, right? Someone who seems one way, but it turns out she's not quite what she seems, and they eventually have a falling out. But in the beginning, she appeals to Sam because she's, instead of being afraid of aging, instead of hiding aging, she seems to be embracing, you know, she's in her 60s and she's tough, and she goes and does this kind of effrontery, this aggressive stand-up that's not funny, and she just kind of, and it's very empowering for her. And Sam tries to do the same thing, and she finds it humiliating. And so I'm very interested in this idea of, you know, doing action and then consequences of that action.
Right.
And, you know, when you're writing a character, it's kind of good to see them get in trouble. It's good to see them make mistakes because they reveal themselves. Right. And it's true that I think she's struggling. The very thing you say is that you put your finger on it, which is so hard to see yourself clearly. And the older you get, I think, well, it's always hard. But when you're older, you're so invested in the status quo. And I think she feels very complicit with the status quo, and she's trying to separate herself and see what her life is really about, what she's doing, who's she responsible for, is she, you know, as a mother, as a citizen, as a wife, as a daughter, and to herself. And I think she doesn't like a lot of what she sees, and she feels she needs to change, but she doesn't know how to do that. So she's in that crisis that you can have. And I think, but I think she's trying not to be self-deluded, which is really hard.
It's an incredible scene. And I want to talk more about that, how we see each other and how others see us. And also the whole thing about being wayward, because I thought it was such a perfect title. And titles are so difficult, at least for me, because, you know, wayward can be like, oh, a wayward woman, which the patriarchy thinks. It also means, you know, going off on your own path. But in your past books, like Eat the Document is about a radical who goes underground, who ends up in suburbia, which is almost the opposite.
Yeah, that's so true. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Stone Arabia, which is so great. It's also about a not so talented musician who's living another life as a really good rock star in his mind. Innocent in Others, again, it's a woman who she's seducing these big Hollywood types on the phone by pretending to be someone she's not. So I'm fascinated with this whole notion you use of who we are and who we try to be. And is it like a suit of clothing on us until we become it? Or how do we really find our true selves? And aren't our true selves changing constantly due to our experience into the world and this technology and men and women around us?
Yeah, that's exactly the questions that I seem to always be obsessed with. And I think, you know, I think one of the reasons why real estate appeals to a lot of people is because I think we think if we move to a new place, we'll be a new person. If we live in a new house, we'll have a different kind of life. And there's some truth to that. I mean, we are shaped by our surroundings, right? And our identities are malleable, but also not, right? And so, and I think that as an aging person, that you feel the world, you still feel like this young person inside, but the world perceives you in a different way. Right. And that's one of the things too that I think she's thinking about too, is that, you know, is it good to be that kind of invisibility that you get in middle age? Is that a good thing? Is that a superpower or a secret superpower, or is that a bad thing? So I don't know the answer to any of these questions, but I just think it's interesting to think about that. And I often find my characters think that they're going to be different, and they end up kind of not as different as that. You know, it's not that easy to change who you are. But I think doing foundational questioning and wondering whether you're on the right path, I think that's a good thing. And I think that's one of the things that I like about menopause is it's a very visceral reminder that your time is limited and you need to pay attention, you know? Right. And the body is really important in this book. So that's kind of, you know, a big part of it is always going back to the body. That's why I liked when Clara Loomis, I thought, okay, I like the very end of that because she's thinking about her body and all her possibilities, you know.
Beautiful last sentence about her body that I should have written down and I didn't, but she is talking about the possibilities of the body. I want to talk more about this Oneida community because even today there are always, like, you always read or hear about it. There's some movie out about these kind of communities that people are always drawn to. And we were talking a little bit before the interview where I told you I had looked up the Anita community because I was so fat. I didn't know about it. And it actually was meant to be a perfectionist. And that's the weird word, perfectionist, religious communal society. It believed that Jesus had already returned, making it possible for them to create this perfect kingdom, not just in heaven on earth. But the members of the community believed that a motherhood could be damaging to women just because it made them exhausted. And they also felt that men had to sort of rein themselves in sexually, whereas women were supposed to have sex with everyone. And it's sort of that supposed to that is kind of how free love is that when you have these orders on you. This whole community was closed in 1854. So what I want to know from you is, how did you know about this community? And it's so interesting how it found its way into the book and what Sam thinks about it. And then what we hear from, we talked before about Clara coming out and talking about her role in it, which was amazing. But I just want to hear your thoughts about it because
it's such an interesting place because you can still visit and go to the community mansion and stay there, and it still exists. It's one of the most successful alternative communities ever because they had the Oneida silverware, and they just always had a good business prospect. Unlike most communes, which end up poor and broke because it's really hard to remake yourself. But I was very interested in this idea, and I've been interested in it since Eat the Document is when I first started thinking about that, because I was thinking about in terms of the 70s alternative communities and how difficult it is to make a new world within the old world, right? Because you're still carrying all the patriarchal stuff with you as you go in, and all the capitalism and everything. And you can't suddenly be reborn in this, and what in the 19th century, in this area of central New York, because of the Erie Canal, there were a lot of experiments in living, all different kinds of religions, and this kind of Bible communism was a way to kind of, by not having any private property, including a husband or a wife or children that were only belong to you, you wouldn't have this vanity that would keep you from being perfected in God's eyes. And there's something to that, right? There's a kind of idealism to that to get because the possession does seem to be a vanity, but at the same time, you can't really. And women in this community could do things they couldn't do in Victorian society. They could keep themselves from getting pregnant, for one thing. They could wear bloomers instead of hoop skirts, and they could cut their hair, and they could do jobs that they couldn't do, and so there was some liberation in it that's appealing. But at the same time, you're supposed to be able to say no to everyone has sex with everyone else, and you're supposed to be able to say no, but that doesn't seem likely if the most powerful person is John Humphrey Noyes, the head of it. If he wants to sleep with you, are you really going to be able to say no, right? And so it seemed problematic.
Well,
and I'm very interested in things. I'm interested in things that have these paradoxes, both good and bad things. Kind of, it's very human, really.
I'm also thinking in terms of the Manson community.
Yeah, right.
Because I interviewed somebody once who knew the Mansons just from the town, and he said, "Well, we all thought it was very attractive at first what he was doing. There was this community, and you could go there, and they would feed you. And the only thing we didn't like is they were a little dirtier than most people."
Right.
But it's these things that sound really attractive, and then when you start to think, well, maybe who's in charge of this, and maybe not. There's this quote from Sam that says she's talking about Syracuse, and she says, "When did progress become so ugly?" And I love that because so much of your work is about technology and technological advances and how we want to make things better. And in doing so, we sometimes make them much worse. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, that's interesting in terms of the perfectionist community too. I don't, I mean, you're asking all these great questions, and I would just say that I just kind of keep asking those questions in my work and not knowing the answers. I do like to write about technology because, again, like, it is something that shapes who we are, and it shapes our identity when we use technology. And so I think if I'm going to write about what it's like to be alive today, you have to write about technology. And then what I like is that in fiction, you're kind of, you get a little weird alienation from the technology that we use every day, and you can see it in a different way. So I like putting like internet comments and Yelp reviews and putting them in the book and kind of playing with it, making fun of it a little bit, Facebook. And then, but also just kind of alienating me, the writer and the reader, from it enough, seeing it dislocated from its usual place, so we can sort of think, wow, we do this all the time. And also when you're using technology, just how does it make you feel in your body and in your consciousness?
Right.
Thinking about it more, because we tend to embrace these things and then we figure out how they affect us, right? So we're all carrying around our smartphones all the time and checking them all the time and being on social media all the time. And eventually we'll figure out what that's done to us, but we're just like this kind of massive experiment, and our children are doing this massive experiment. And with the pandemic, I mean, my daughter had, a lot more online than she was two years ago. What are the long-term implications of that? We'll find out,
We will find out. It's sort of like the long-term implications with something like climate change, where we all thought we had these great inventions and time saving and this and that, and they basically kill the planet. So,
right.
There's like a good
unintended consequences. Yes, right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of divides in this novel, which I love. There's like the beauty of technology, and then the terribleness of it. There's also aging and youth, and there's a lot about money and stuff. In fact, at one point, Sam was wondering, like, how do you live if you renounce wealth? Because she leaves her husband and she goes to this house to renovate it, but she's still sort of under the power of a man who is supporting her, and that is really problematic. And I was wondering if you thought there could ever be real equality between the sexes, or even between like two partners, if they both are not sort of equal in terms of money.
Well, that's a good question. And, my mother was very adamant when I was growing up to say that, make sure you always have your own money. Right. because she didn't. And it does. And I do think that affects you, your possibilities. But I think what's interesting is when you get to a certain age, what we call a certain age, right? When you get to middle age, you realize that, Sam realizes she needs money, that she doesn't know how to be in the world without that money, that she wants to be free of it. She wants to be like Dorothy Day and go live without the money, but she backslides because she's really frightened. And when she was younger, she wasn't scared of being broke. But now that she's middle-aged, being broke is much more frightening to her. And she doesn't know if she's brave enough to do this thing, or she can handle it. And so she backslides in lots of ways. She starts sleeping with her husband again. She's full of these contradictions and hypocrisies, but she's aware of it at the same time. And she's trying to figure out, again, I think it comes back to these ideas of identity. What are you if you take away your money? And are you ever going to be the same? And she thinks, oh, I could get this job, or I could get that job. And I do think that that's one of the things she feels. She's had a great privilege in her life. She's been given a lot, and has she done enough with it? And I think she feels really complicit with the state of things in the neighborhood that she lives in, where the inequities are so obvious to her in a way they aren't in the suburbs. You can kind of hide it from yourself more. But I think after the election in 2016, a lot of things are hard to ignore. They've been there all along. The inequity's been there, the racism, the misogyny, but it's much more in your face after the election. So I think she's trying to be honest about you know, these things with herself and what she's responsible for, you know.
I always want to know, in terms of, I've read and loved all your work, and I want to know, when you start a new novel, do you feel like you're building on what has come before, that you've learned things that you want to apply, or do you feel like me, that it's writer's amnesia and you have no idea what you're doing and you're just going to sort of jump into it?
I was going to ask you, how do you feel about it? Because you've written a lot more books than I have.
Writer's amnesia.
Yeah.
I never know what I'm doing.
I mean, I think sometimes when you're done with a book, I don't know if you feel this way, you think, well, I want to do something totally different now, right? And but then you always end up sort of kind of going back to a lot of your same things, no matter what. They just kind of come up and you realize, oh, I'm kind of going back there again. But you know, it's a strange thing, having the only thing good about having written multiple books is that you know you can do it, and you know that when you're having moments of doubt, that's part of the process. The first time you're doing it, you're thinking, gee, maybe I can't do this. I've never, you know, but once you've done it, you realize, okay, that's part of the process. You have to feel lost. You have to feel confused, and you'll keep going, you know.
I have one more question before we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, which is, I love this book because so much of it is about aging in the age of Trump. And I was wondering about if we can ever really separate how we see ourselves and how the world almost insists that we be seen. I mean, aged people are seen a certain way, and it's very hard to break free of that. Women are seen a certain way, teenagers are seen a certain way. I guess the real question is the political always personal?
I would say yes. And I think that so much of when I thought about it, one of the things I think with Sam is that she realizes a lot of the misogyny that she has is very internal, and she's doing it to herself and she's doing it to other women. And that, I think, makes her feel worried about her daughter, you know, that has she, some of that stuff where she's trying to protect her daughter when her daughter's 14 and going to the mall, and she's wearing like the low cut shirt and the short skirt, and she just finds herself saying things that don't feel feminist to her as she tries to protect her from this world. And of course, the irony is that her daughter ends up getting in trouble anyway, that you can't really protect someone. You could just try to make them resilient and tough. But it's, and I think that all of those choices that you make for yourself, you're also making it affects how other women go through the world, and our younger generation goes through the world too. Yeah. So so I do think it's not that I don't think it's not that I would judge someone, oh, you shouldn't have plastic surgery, or you shouldn't try to be, you should embrace your aging. I have no idea. I mean, but I don't think it's true that you're just you yourself don't affect other people. I don't think that's true.
Okay. Do we have a question? Any questions, Ollie? Okay, well, if we don't, then I have another question for you. If I can find it here. Hold on. Oh, yeah. So you're done with this book. You're publicizing it. Are you working on something else now?
I'm working on an opera. I'm working on an opera kind of about climate change. It's about the Newtown Creek, which is between Brooklyn and Queens. It's one of the most polluted waterways in America, and and I'm collaborating with two other artists, and I'm just doing the libretto part of it. But it is a very big departure for me about thinking about thinking about garbage and pollution and the water, and who has access to the water, and development. Yeah, kind of going along some of the stuff I have in there about developers and, libertarians, and, who is the public for? What is the public? What do we want to be public, and who is it for? And is it all just for private capital, or is there some community interest in these things? And certainly climate change makes you think about that a lot, right?
So through your research on this and learning about this, do you have hope for the future in terms of climate change? Or do you think that industry, as long as money is involved, there's money again, as long as money is involved, that's going to be king, and the regular people cannot come up against that?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do think the way they came up with the vaccines so quickly when they needed to,
Right.
makes me think that they'll, I mean, human beings have great ingenuity, and I'm wondering if that will be saved by our smart brains in the end, if we keep trying. The question is, do we have the will to kind of do it? Because, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
I try to be hopeful.
Yeah, I try to be a Pollyanna about it. You mentioned in an interview that you love lists. Tell us about your love of lists. What do you
No, it's a
list?
good question.
How does it help you? Does it make you feel like you're controlling your world better?
So one of the things the book's about, I think, is that this lack of control that you
Right.
feel as you age, right? We don't have any control of our bodies really,
No.
or the finite points of them, but it feels particularly true when you're aging, and
Right.
and your relationship to time changes. And I think writing in general gives me a sense of control because you're the god of your world, right? And lists, what I like about lists is kind of like what I was saying about technology, is that when you put things in a list, you're kind of giving them a different syntactical weight than they would have in a normal sentence, right?
Right.
You're equating
Right.
things, and you're sort of creating, and it almost like, to me, it's almost poetry in prose, because you're kind of you're dislocating words, and you're making people look at them in a different way and think about their relationship to each other without that kind of connected syntax that you normally get. And I think it's interesting and fun to do that, because I think it changes things when you make lists. And then it also has a character who is making that list. It tells you something about them, right? Like, why are they making this list? What are they trying to sort out? And I think also just, I make lists a lot every day. I make lists about like what I'm going to do today. And and it does give me a sense of control that's false. Yes.
Do you save one? Do you save your list so you look back and think, oh, 5 years ago I was making lists about clothes or whatever?
I have a lot of notebooks that have a lot of lists in them. And my husband makes lists, and when he does things, he crosses them out so completely that he can't see them anymore. And that must be just that's a different way of trying to have control. He just like obliterates them. And for me, I like seeing what's on my list.
Oh yeah, I have like here's
Yeah.
here's my list for today. That's so funny.
I have a spatial brain, I think, where I need to see things and like kind of planned out. On my bulletin board too, I have things in spatial relationship to each other.
I love that. I love that. So there's a whole lot of middle of the night thinking in the novel, and you've spoken about that. So I want to know, do you do middle of the night thinking, and does it help? Is it something you recommend?
No, I think sleep's really important. I value sleep, and I try to get sleep. But sometimes when you can't sleep, rather than stressing about it, maybe getting up and reading or writing until you're sleepy again can sometimes be a very peaceful time, and you have different access to different parts of yourself. If you're not doing like the monkey brain of stress that you do when you're like trying to sleep and you're thinking about what you have to do tomorrow and you need to sleep, and it's just a stress spiral. But if you just get up and kind of like look out the window and, have a cup of tea or something and read, I think it's interesting to, the noise isn't there, but if you go on Twitter, no, that's not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have tremendous sleep problems, and I never can sleep. And I used to get up and see, oh, who's on Twitter? And then I would be up for another 5 hours. It was exactly the wrong thing to do.
It's hard to resist sometimes, but
yeah, it is.
I remember the night that I got on Twitter in the middle of the night, and I was like, I shouldn't do it. And then I opened it up, and it was Trump got COVID. Do you remember when that happened? And I was like, oh shit, what does this mean? And I was just, like trying to figure out what this meant. Do you remember we didn't know, did this mean the election was going to go this way or that? It was like crazy. So yeah, looking at the internet sometimes in the middle of the night, not a good move.
And
No.
yeah, it can make you crazy. It's another one of those technology things where it's fabulous in many ways, and in other ways, it's damaging because you can make yourself crazy. Every day I look and see what's trending, and there are certain names when they're trending where you get this icy finger on your throat because you think, "Oh my God, what does that mean?" I have one last question for you. What's obsessing you now, and why?
Oh, it's good. You
Sorry,
know,
I
I am an
always want to
obsessive
know.
person. Well, it's weird. This summer, my husband and I decided to watch as many movies from the 1970s as we could, many of which I'd seen. But so now I have this giant list of movies from the
Wow.
70s that we're crossing off as we speak.
Wait, we have to. I'm addicted to movies. Did you see? I hope like Midnight Cowboys on that, right?
Oh, we did see Midnight Cowboy, but Robert
Finders-
Altman kind of took over the list. So recently we saw Nashville. Oh my God, what a great movie! What a great movie!
Nashville really holds up.
It
It's so
does.
important to
And
them.
Three Women. What a great movie! Oh my God.
Yep.
So many great weird movies, and The Long Goodbye, great movie.
The Long Goodbye is
They're
wonderful.
better than ever, you know.
Wow, and Blow Up also. Blow Up was it? Yeah,
Blow Up is 60s. Blow Out. Brian De Palma did his version. That was like 1980. Yeah, some great movies and so fun. All those actors, you know, Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland, and it was just a different time. And New York looks so gritty in all these. We watched Serpico and we watched Dog Day Afternoon, and New York is so filthy and gritty in all of that.
Yeah, it's totally different. That's why you wouldn't go to Soho, because you would get raped and attacked. And now Soho is where you go to for Prada. One more question. Thank you. How do you feel about not being able to stick to your to-do list? And would you change anything in your book if you had a chance? That's
okay. The first part, I never finish my to-do lists. They just kind of get transferred to the next to-do list. And so, you know, it's the way I work on my books too. I always have ambitions to be like, I'll be on page 100 by Christmas or whatever. And I fail to meet those goals. But then I make it by failing is the way I look at it. Failing and knowing I'm going to fail. And then I just keep trying. So failure is part of the list. That's okay. And what would I change in the book? I don't think I can. There's, you know, I try not to think that way, but I will say this: when I read from it, I never stop editing until it's ripped out of my fingers. So I want to change little things all the time. You know, I keep revising, and that's, you know, it is what it is, and then you write the next one. And I think you know, one of the things that you need to do is just kind of like let it go. But if I didn't let it go, I would just change it into another book probably. And I wish in the acknowledgments I had mentioned specifically that Clara Loomis is imaginary, because people keep thinking she's real.
Really?
Yeah. So I think in the paperback I'll make it very explicit that she's imaginary. A couple of reviews said this kind of figure, you know, and I'm like, not real. Yeah.
That's incredible. I want to ask you, it's sort of another writer's issue. Do you show pages to other people, like more than one or just one? And also, how do you deal with reviews? I mean, this book has gotten spectacular attention, as well it should. But I'm just curious about that, because every writer in their career, I mean, in your career, you must have gotten like one review that made you want to jump off your house.
Oh yeah. I am very lucky. I have a husband who's also a writer.
Oh, that's great.
Jonathan D is a great writer, and I will show him sometimes things. I try not to do it until I really have a sense of the novel and I almost have a draft, because I don't want to be shaken off my weird obsession. I don't want my confidence to be, but certainly then when I have a draft, I definitely show it to him and a few other people, other writers who give me, you know, their feedback. And I also, the second part of the question, what was the second part of the question? Oh, what was it?
Oh yeah. How do you, it
Oh,
was
how do you
like
deal with reviews? Oh, so my husband also, I don't Google myself or Twitter search myself um, or Instagram myself. My husband looks for me and then lets me know what I need to see.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And the
That's
reason
perfect.
is because there was one time where I heard, like a couple books ago, some random person tweeted or something that after I did a radio interview that I sounded like, did I sound like a softball coach when I spoke? And I have no idea what that meant,
What
but
does
it made
that
me
mean?
very self-conscious, and I was sort of obsessed over it. And then I just thought, like, you can't pay attention to every bit of
No.
commentary in the world, you know? And so you don't want to look at Amazon, reviews. You
Oh
don't want to
no,
look
no,
at
no, no, no.
Goodreads and all these things, because it interferes with you. I'm weak. If I were a strong person, it would be fine, but I'll be distracted by it, and I'll just think, what? And so he lets me know what's important, and then I try not I try not to be too focused on that, but it's really hard because, of course, you write because you want responses from people and you want to hear what they think of your book. So you do want to read some of it, but you don't maybe want to read all of it. That's my answer.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, I want to tell everybody again, this book is so extraordinary. It's just, I just, of all your books, and I've loved all your books, I love this one the most. It's just incredible. Everybody should go and buy it and buy the rest of Dana's books. We recommend bookshop.org because it helps indie bookstores, or you can go to your favorite indie bookstore, or you can buy it anywhere where books are sold. This interview will be live forever on YouTube, so you can watch it again. You can put in comments again if you like. And I really want to thank you, Dana. I've been wanting to desperately meet you since your first novel. So this interview, just like, I was so jazzed to do it, and thank you for being completely wonderful here. We really appreciate it. It was a great discussion with you.
Thank you so much for your amazing questions and for reading my books and for having me on the show. And thanks to everybody for coming, and to Ollie for organizing it all. It's been so great. Thank you.
So we'll see all of you, and I guess this is ending the broadcast now. I'm going to let Ollie do it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Bye.